Sons of the Forest has plenty of what the original Forest offered, but when it comes to what's new, there's no better place to start than with our new little AI helper friend, Kelvin. He could well have revolutionized survival games as we know them, and Kelvin is one of your operative team members, and we're being sent on a mission to rescue the billionaire Puffton family members for reasons unknown. The helicopter that we're traveling in is shot down, segueing into what's become a very typical survival game intro, but prior to this, we do get a little glimpse into Kelvin's personality before he received his vocal removing brain damage. So while everyone else is hard at work planning their upcoming mission, Kelvin's obnoxiously enjoying the presence of his own company and copying the homework of his teammate. Then we get a little glimpse into how severe his brain damage actually is, as his eyeballs are launched out of their sockets, and we even get a little glimpse into what our playable protagonist actually thinks of Kelvin, probably sick of all his obnoxious knee slapping and crazy eyeball launching shenanigans, clearly refusing to stick out a hand to help poor Kelvin, and then pretending that he does really care at the very last second, like, oh no, Kelvin, you're falling. Oh shit, so am I. And so the game begins. Oh, and look who it is causing a scene. It's always about you, Kelvin. I was glad to see he got his eyeballs back at least, but I soon realised he's completely mute and void of all emotions. I thought this has got the potential to blossom into a very real relationship, similar to mine and the missus actually, except I'm the Kelvin. I started handing out written instructions for Kelvin to execute via my notepad, and off he went. Now, base building is an entirely optional aspect to the game, minus creating a tent to save your game, and the gathering of items on your quest to build a new home is where Kelvin truly shines, streamlining the process so you've both got a little conveyor belt of logs heading towards your base's location. I truly believe this will revolutionize how survival games are developed going forward, especially ones with single player experiences, and while playing co-op is an option, Kelvin really helps alleviate a lot of the grind for those wanting to build a skyscraper made entirely of logs. Kelvin will also be a helping hand pointing towards any of those pesky cannibals that are lurking in the bushes, and even though he's a spineless coward that'll run in the opposite direction, he'll at least provide you with a good source of entertainment by setting himself on fire for your own amusement. He requires little maintenance other than being picked up once he's been downed, and he can be killed, removing him entirely from that playthrough. But Kelvin isn't the only potential helping hand found on the island though. A mysterious three-armed and three-legged succubus style and elegant ballerina will grace you with her presence, a very different presence to Kelvin, but a helpful one nonetheless. I won't spoil too much about her backstory because she is linked to the overarching narrative, but she too can help you out. Think of Kelvin like a good little doggy, obediently taking orders and needing a break once in a while, with his affinity to the player being more stamina based, whereas our triple-limbed lady is more like a cat, wandering off doing her own thing, and depending on your actions in her presence, that will change her affinity towards you and play nicely, and she'll start bringing you little treats like health plants or little bits of food to eat. Both of the AI helpers will bring you your basic survival items of health and food, and it's like the old saying, teach a man to fish and now you've got some fuckwit who'll keep bringing you fish. It's very helpful. The one thing our female tripod friend won't gather for you though is the base building requirements, which is a shame really, because you would have thought the one with 3 arms would have been able to do a little bit more of the heavy lifting. The base building mechanics have been totally revamped too, again a refreshing and innovative mechanic that I think a lot of other survival games will start to take inspiration from. You can revert to the original method of base building for those who prefer, but there's a much wider level of creative freedom afforded to the player with a step-by-step instruction in a manual merely guiding you instead of quite literally boxing you into a certain design. Chopping logs in halves, quarters, filing down the ends to create spikes, it all adds a very methodical feel to the process rather than chucking a load of materials into a prefabricated ghosted blueprint. It does require a lot of trial and error figuring out these new mechanics though, so I think some, probably most, would prefer to watch a few tutorials to avoid your time being overly abused, whereas some might see the learning curve as part of the process. It's fantastic that Endnight kept the original methods as part of this sequel though, albeit a totally innovative reinvention of base building. They haven't forced players to go down a road saying, right, that's it, this is the way you're going to build a base from now on, deal with it. The custom mode does get a little finicky after a while though. Placing certain logs in hard to reach places can be infuriating in truth, trying to find that white dotted prompt to suggest you can place a log there. Not a regular occurrence thankfully, and one that'll hopefully get ironed out during the early access. The original Forest is one of my favourite survival games of all time, and a big reason for that is because there's an effectual and meaningful plotline to commit to with multiple endings. This reason on its own isn't enough for survival games to be considered one of the greats, but giving me an end goal with an alluring and highly disturbing environmental lore concealed within a huge island should be a standard inclusion in survival games. A lot of survival games restrict any narrative to my own imagination, but developers Endnight went above and beyond when it comes to the Forest's world building and the narrative. The same can be said about Sons of the Forest, though bear in mind it's still in early access and Endnight fleshed out the original Forest story into what it is today while that was in early access too, so don't be surprised to see the same happen again. That same gameplay loop that we found in the Forest can also be found in Sons of the Forest, linking key items and tools that are needed to progress through the plotline, and we're not spoon-fed this story either. Similar to the Forest, there's an immersive sense of realism to exploring the island's surface, finding traces of human life that were there before you, and eventually being brave enough to delve deep into the island's caves, being home to the deformed and deranged monstrosities that were forced to fight. I felt the caves in the original Forest had a much better level design to them though, with a whole underground network of tunnels and most being linked to one another. While the Sons of the Forest caves are still home to arguably even more terrifying mutants, their design feel more like an A to B in truth. I felt like they were a little easier to navigate, and coming out of the other end of one never felt too far away from the entry point of that cave. The cannibals' behaviour in the Forest wasn't like anything I've ever seen in a game before, and again, the same can be said in Sons of the Forest, but a few more intricate details have been added to their AI model. Same again, when you're first starting out, they don't just attack on sight, they'll just come to observe. Eventually they'll start to get closer and closer to you before turning up with more numbers than last time, and then eventually they'll maybe even lob a cheeky rock at you before running off again. Before you know it, you've got an army of cannibals probing for weaknesses and hunting you down day in, day out. In Sons of the Forest, I loved sprinting through the dense forest, inevitably getting a face full of bush, and with the visibility decreasing, the fear factor increases tenfold, especially when the harrowing screech of a cannibal can be heard a little too close for comfort. What impressed me most in Sons of the Forest was their reactions to their impending deaths, as one writhes on the floor in pain with a missing arm, another will approach the corpse of a presumed loved one and wail in sorrow at what you've done, and then another cheeky twat will just start stealing the logs that you've accumulated. Picking the best base location and building some defenses is vital as ever, with less places to hide this time around. Seasons play a big role in not only the atmosphere but the dynamic gameplay elements, such as winter bringing a new temperature mechanic to worry about, staying warm, finding food becomes harder, and building on the one tiny island that's in the game doesn't guarantee your safety this time because the water will freeze over, and that's right, those arse bandits will walk right on over and smash your base to bits. I eventually found one of the many 3D printers hidden around the island that'll print some decent items like a snow sled. I mean, as if my life wasn't dangerous enough already, I thought finding myself a viciously steep mountainside littered with rocks and trees would be the perfect way to cheer myself up during the winter months. I'm a big fan of the inventory menu design in the Forest, and it's more or less the same again though, with an even deeper crafting system expanding as you progress. That means you've got more stuff, and laying all of your stuff out to choose or craft from doesn't fit on your screen, so pushing the view into the corners to just about get a little glimpse of the item you're trying to interact with can become a little tedious after a while. I think just pulling the camera back a little would do the trick here so I can see all of my stuff at once. Another little issue I had that's already been added in the most recent hotfix was there were no hotkeys, so the quickest way to whip out your axe was to pull out your backpack for quicker access, but you could only apply a certain amount of items to your backpack. Now that Endnight have added hotkeys, I'm not sure I've actually got a use for the backpack function, which is the shame because it does look cool, albeit frustrating annoyingly slow in the heat of a fight, but adding these hotkeys is just an example of what's to come with early access and the developers listening to the players. I think the combat model is more or less the same as the original Forest, which was the weakest aspect of the game, namely from a melee weapon point of view at least anyway, whereas the arrival of this military-style operative team has seen a bigger use of firearms, which feel pretty good to use, no auto-reloading which I liked, and the visual feedback from blasting your shotty and seeing a cannibal flying away with a missing limb or two is as gratifying as it gets. Performance-wise, I've struggled, and I know I sound like a broken record, but this is what you get in early access. With the infinite amount of PC hardware possibilities, Endnight are continually looking for the sweet spot in performance. I suffered with a lot of shader cache stuttering when entering new areas, a huge amount of pop-in, the odd frame drop, and a ton of ghosting. For reference, I'm playing with an 11th gen i9, a 3090 and 32 gigs of RAM, and I'm playing at 4K with my settings mostly on high and some not so high, but DLSS is set to quality to achieve a pretty solid 60 FPS. It did take a lot of frustrating tweaking to get me there, mind you, but the world looks absolutely stunning as a result. Such a crisp and vibrant world, literally full of life, with every falling leaf and swaying branch adding so much atmosphere to the whole experience. The odd texture does look a little blotchy, but overall an island that's a treat on the eyeballs, except for Kelvin's. Ultimately, if this is early access with a ton of scheduled updates and optimizations to follow, I can't wait to see the fully polished final product and hopefully see this head to console for everyone to enjoy sooner rather than later. If you've already spent some time on Sons of the Forest, get in the comments below. I'd love to hear your thoughts, and I'll see you in the next one.